how can I recognize when I'm overcommitting and take steps to course correct? So, we're going to break it down, right? So, first, what's going on with our nervous system and what in our socialization is triggering it? So, what's going on in this situation, right? Where you recognize that you keep overcommitting and then it comes time to deliver, right? And so, past you made decisions that present you dreads, right? And future you's already like crying in the bathtub over, right? Like this is what happens when we overcommit. So there's some basic human things at play here, right? Like the planning fallacy, where we underestimate the time and effort that it'll take to do something in the short term, and then underestimate how much we can actually accomplish in the long term. We've also got an optimism bias that's at play, where we think we will magically have the energy and capacity when the time comes. Like, I just, evening events, it's going to be hit or miss for me. Present me thinks, oh man, it'd be so fun to go to that thing and like meet up with some women in real life. And then present me thinks, oh, in the moment, future me, but now present me thinks, oh, I can't. Like I have nothing more on this day, right? And so instead of shaming myself for it, beating myself up, or forcing myself to go when I really don't have the capacity, right? I just understand that sometimes I'm just not going to want to go. And it's absolutely okay to change my mind later. The other part to think about is our brains. Like our brains are lazy. They want to desire pleasure, avoid pain, and do as little as possible. And so a yes releases a little dopamine hit. We made someone happy in the moment, right? But what that happens is because our brains don't have the capacity to process that and it desires pleasure, it goes for that short term dopamine hit without really thinking about the longer term pain of having to deliver on that thing we said yes to that we probably don't have the capacity to follow through on. And so saying yes in that moment, it overrides the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that makes us human. And so our nervous system and everything's going on in our brains, like, I just want that little dopamine hit. And we're not engaging the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's responsible for reasoning and emotional regulation and planning to think, is this something I should be saying yes to? Right. And then when in the present, when you have to do it, your nervous system is triggered all over again, and you start beating yourself up, which is a fight response, or you're filled with dread, which might trigger a number of responses. It could be a flight response where you're like, I want to avoid it, right? Or we might start arguing about like why we have to do this, right, in our heads or actually with the person, right? And so all of these things are going on in our brain. These are just things that we're not aware of. We just know like we feel dread or we feel anxious, but we don't know why. And so hopefully breaking that down a little bit helps you understand like, why do I say yes in the moment? It's so amazing. Like I just say yes and then I have to deliver and I regret it, right? Okay. So a big factor at play here is our socialization. So we get our what I call validation cookies, right? For being accommodating and agreeable and selfless. So saying yes will feel like the right thing to do, right? And then there's also the belief that we have to follow through on everything to be good and reliable and worthy, right? As women, like these are very desirable traits for us. And we're taught to deprioritize our own needs or ignore them and completely override them in favor of other people's needs. And we get cookies for that, right? We get the validation cookies for that, for like, it's kind of a sick cycle where we get rewarded on some level, at least in the short term, for saying yes, even though we're doing it at the expense of our own needs. And then self-doubt is really profitable, right? You tell yourself you should be able to handle it, that there's something wrong with you. Like I used to, tell myself, like, why can't you just get it together? Like, just suck it up, buttercup, do it, right? Instead of thinking, like, is this even a system that and is what being asked of me even fair, right? I always made it like my fault. And I see this in my clients a lot too. Okay. So what kind of feelings are we going to be up against when we find ourselves in this overcommitted cycle? Well, obviously regret that we said yes, right? Anxiety and dread as the deadline approaches, right? Resentment and anger towards the people who asked, shame for having a normal human reaction, right? Of like, oh, I don't really want to do that. And then also exhaustion from overcommitting and undertending to our own needs. Yeah, Marissa said, so identify with that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so what happens is, of course, we shove our needs down and further suck it up if like we're only getting, appreciation from other people when we're taking care of them. No one appreciates us for taking care of ourselves, right? Of course, we put ourselves last when there's no cookies for putting ourselves first. Of course, we procrastinate or we bail at the last minute when we inevitably end up in overwhelm, right? And then, of course, we're going to beat ourselves up for it, like we're somehow flawed as human beings. And of course, after all of that, right, we're going to add shame and everything else on top of it. Of course we do. It makes total sense when you look at it from like, here's how my socialization hits my nervous system. Of course I'm going to do these things. It makes total sense. So, what are the outcomes that happen when we keep overcommitting? Well, obviously, we get into a cycle of fatigue and overwhelm. We don't have the spoons. We say yes when we mean no. We can't maintain boundaries and we can't hold other people accountable. And when we can't do that, then that takes up even more time, right? It's a really bad cycle to find yourself in. Or we can operate like a robot and disconnect from our bodies and our needs and go into survival mode of like, I just have to get through this. It doesn't really matter, right? I'm going to have gummy bears for dinner, right? Like, I'm just going to get through this particular day or week or project or whatever it is, right? Or I feel shame because I'm beating myself up, or I feel resentment towards the people that I love the most for being one more thing on my list that I'm like falling short in my estimation, falling short on delivering. Okay, so what do we do about it? One thing we can do is just pause before saying yes. Like, let the prefrontal cortex have some time to get booted up. Remember, your brain desires pleasure. And so that dopamine hit of saying yes and everyone being like, yay, she said yes, right? Like, just give it a moment. And I know that can feel really hard, right? But you can just say something like, I think that should work, but let me get back to you. Or if you're in a work situation, say, I'm not sure I have the bandwidth for this. Can I get back to you by blah, blah, blah time? Right. And it's going to feel a little uncomfortable in the moment. But this is the thing that we're doing for the long term gain of not being overcommitted. Right. Then we don't have to let people down. We don't have to back out of things. Right. If we don't say yes to start with, then we're able, and we're also able to execute on the things that we've already said yes to. Like, it's really this pause before saying yes is really, really important. And then the second part, while you're considering it, is like, check your motivation for saying yes. Is it a hell yes, or is it like, sure, I could, right? And then ask yourself, whose needs am I prioritizing by saying yes? It doesn't always have to be yours, but do you like your reasons, right? Well, I'm afraid they'll be upset with me. Is a reason that you want to really spend a little bit of time with. Like, am I okay with that? Can I say no, honor my needs, and hold space for their disappointment if I say no, right? I can still be a reliable friend or a dedicated teammate and say no sometimes, right? You're not going to suddenly just be like, nope, now she's a terrible teammate because she said no to this one thing. And then here's the thing, I just really, really want, if you do find that you said yes, I want you to remember you can change your mind at any time, even if you said yes, even if they're counting on you, even if your boss expects it, even if you think it'll make you look bad, even if you could technically make it work by sacrificing your well being, right? Even if it means disappointing someone, you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. These are presumably adults in your life that you're dealing with, and you get to decide what works for you, and you do not need anyone else's permission to change your mind. Okay. And then the last thing, a thought that really helped me get more comfortable with saying no, particularly with my family, is that every no I say is a yes to myself. So that's a thought you can borrow. All right. So that was overcommitting and figuring out how do we start interrupting that cycle of overcommitting and like the thing that just sort of builds on itself.